Thank you to those of you who were able to join us. It's a little bit odd time today compared to our usual webinars, but I'm so excited to have my colleagues Kevin, Kyla, and Eric on this call with me today to talk through building your college application strategy. A couple of announcements just about the webinar really quick. We are recording this session, so it will be available on our website starting tomorrow. We'll send out the link to everybody, so in case you want to share it with a friend, or if you aren't able to finish the call for some reason, you're always able to watch that recording later on. We will also be sending out a quick survey at the end of the presentation as well, and we'd really love to get your feedback. So let us know if you love it, if you hate it, if there are topics that you'd like us to talk about in the future. We would love to hear from you. We do have a Q&A that we'll be using in the webinar today. So if you go to the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should have the Q&A box there. Feel free to put questions in there throughout the presentation at any point when you think of them. We will build in some time at the end to go over any questions that you have. So you can send them in now, you can send them in later, whenever it works for you. So I will be passing it on now to my colleagues to talk to you about college application strategy. Take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Olivia, and welcome everybody. We are very excited to be chatting about building your college application strategy today. So to kick us off, just some quick intros. My name is Kyla Fish. I am a college advisor here at Logic Prep. I have experience working at Northeastern University as well as Boston College. I have over half a decade of experience working in higher education, and I've had experience working in education and with students really throughout my entire professional career. Super excited to be chatting with you today. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Eric, to introduce himself.
Thank you so much, Kyla, and I so appreciate everyone for attending today's webinar. My name is Eric Lopez. I previously worked at Tufts University as an admissions officer, and I've also dabbled in many other different colleges, in particular scholarship programs across the country. One in particular is Jack Kent Cooke, one of the most selective in the country. So happy to bring my knowledge and know-how. I've spent over just about 10 years now working in particularly student-facing support roles, and so working with students to design a plan, make sure that they're on track at the same time, achieve those goals by putting those actionable items in place and strategies that help them out. So happy to talk with you all today.
Cool. And I'll go next. Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin. I'm one of our global college advisors, which means that I help students with applying to university all over the world, with the exception of the US. However, I do leverage my background in US admissions at the schools listed below and a few others that I've worked at, including Tufts as well. We have a good Tufts presence here today. But I'm excited to talk today about our international destinations and how to best support students as they apply to universities all over the world. So thanks for being here.
Great, thank you. So in terms of what we're going to be covering today, we'll do a quick introduction, really setting the scene of why building a college list is so important and kind of when to start it. We'll talk about discovering your fit. So when we say that, we mean discovering what you are thinking about, what you like in a school, what you don't like in a school, and then giving some strategies and tips around researching these institutions to, again, help inform that college list that you'll be building. And then how do you take all of those pieces to create a balanced college list moving forward? And then we'll end with sharing where some of our, or most of our Logic Prep students are applying geographically to help you just get a sense, like Kevin said, all over the world where we have students applying to, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So in terms of a college list, when do you want to start building a college list? It's really as early as you can. And this is not to say if you haven't started that you are, far behind by any means, but really when you start thinking about the college process, you want to start thinking about building that college list. It's going to start really big, and you're going to have the opportunity to narrow it down as you go through and research and visit and all, engage with different institutions. You'll be able to narrow down that list to really your top schools that you're going to eventually apply to. It's so important to go through this exploration stage because you're going to be able to learn what you do and what you don't like in schools. Eric will talk more about defining that right fit shortly. You'll also be able to better understand what selectivity means when it comes to colleges and universities. And you're also going to be able to learn that there are different admission processes basically at every single school that you are looking at and applying to. And while kind of the standard baseline expectation is that you're applying to them and you're receiving a decision, what happens internally can look very different college to college and university to university. And so you want to just start having that exploration, and you want to be able to start engaging with admission officers and learning more about the school so that you can make that informed, balanced list for you. So moving right over, I'm going to have Eric talk to us a little bit about discovering your fit in terms of your schools.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kyla. I think, really starting as early as possible, right? Is just really being able to say, where are we visiting? What's going on in this campus? What are the students like here? And I think these are the three primary questions that start off that discovering of their fit, right? What is important to you, right? This is a list that can go on and on and on, and is defined by each student and their family, right? This is a family decision, and it takes each person. At the same time, the student attending is the student who's attending this experience. So what are they looking for in terms of academics and majors? The community, are they looking for somewhere where they can explore different opportunities, go travel globally? Affordability, right? One of the primary anxieties of the families that I think anyone is talking with today is talking about the cost of college. What are we understanding in terms of state pricing, in-state pricing, out-of-state pricing, and the various scholarships that our students are eligible for? Religious affiliation, location diversity, all of these have so many different threads about them. And what it means is, right, how do you have a thoughtful dinner table conversation? How do you have a thoughtful conversation in the car on the way to school that allows you to start understanding what's important to you? The same thing can be said of what type of college they want to attend. Is this someone who's looking for something more rural? Are they looking for something that allows them to be in a brand new world? I think I have students myself who are looking for, big universities in the middle of a city. They want to explore a new town they've never been to, a new city they've never been to, a new part of the country, a new part of the world. And so when we think of those types of designations, we have to understand that even amongst that city, there are different sizes of colleges, different levels of emphasis on research, different levels of emphasis on community. And so thereby, right, we have to then make sure we're understanding, what are we interested in studying? What is our student looking for? Are they looking for something in STEM and the liberal arts? Or is this based in very specialized programming? And then I think one of the things that sneaks up on all of our students and sneaks up on any of us is the fact of a core curriculum or the lack thereof. It's a huge question when it comes to, am I talking with a student who dislikes math in a way that they are avoiding it with every fiber of their being and hope to do so when they get to college? There are programs and opportunities to do so and do that across our country and across the different opportunities we find around the world. So it's to say, how are you having these distinct conversations? How are you then recording those and making sure you're visiting universities and colleges that offer maybe the opportunity for you to discover that fit? And one thing I'll always add, because I students say this all the time, I had an amazing tour on this campus. I had an amazing person. Remember, that's one perspective of many. Keep asking different folks about what's important to you, what type of colleges they attended, what did they study, how was their experience like. Anyone connected to the college, anyone connected to that experience that you're looking for. It's how can you continuously add more perspectives to then be able to help you create a full picture of the type of opportunity not only you're looking for, but of the opportunity on that campus that you're hopefully applying for. So Kyla, we'll take it to the next slide. And we'll move folks on over to how to do that research then, right? Because I think if we're asking all of these tough questions and putting them down on paper, or, I had a student who put them on Post-it notes in front of their computer, that they were always adding new research topics and adding new things they wanted to bring up to me, right? One of the primary ways to do so is to explore that website. Understanding those admissions requirements right away is understanding what are the type of factors that we need to control for, which is to say, required testing, required supplemental materials and essays, GPA requirements for specific scholarships and or for enrollment into the institution. And then thereby, right, what is the admissions office saying through blog posts, through their official understanding and official documentation of their admissions policies? What are they saying about how they read applications? What are they saying about holistic reading? Do they say that academics carry a heavier weight? Are there no supplements or essays required? These are all factors we want to make sure of as we continuously research these institutions and look towards, a really big aspect of this that's currently in the of mind to all of us is these test optional policies of these colleges, which is to say, inclusive of ACT, SAT, AP, and IB. These are things that I think that exploring their website can give you that first look at all of these different aspects. And then attending virtual and in-person programming. I highly advise that folks, before they even visit a campus, there's no reason not to take in that 30, 45-minute, virtual programming of their info session beforehand to say, hey, is this something that I want to learn more about, right? They offer that opportunity since about 2020. I've seen more and more colleges offer full, robust virtual programming for both domestic students and international students. So take advantage of those. And then when you visit that campus, take advantage of seeing these folks in person, introduce yourself, find out more, ask those deeper questions that you found out about your own fit, and be able to provide those to the admissions representative who may also visit your school. And please attend those visits. Make yourself known to them while they are on the road. As someone who was on the road for many weeks at a time, meeting plenty of people. When I had someone with a smiling face who wanted to talk to me about why they wanted to attend my institution, it's part of the warmth that I needed first to be able to be successful in my job, but also to be able to then put information on that student and say, hey, the student has demonstrated some level of interest, which is to say, demonstrated interest plays a required component for some colleges. Some colleges state very clearly how demonstrated interest is a part of the application process for them, how a visit to the campus, how attendance at a virtual programming can thereby influence the application process. But more commonly than not, demonstrated interest is an aspect that is appreciated, but not necessarily held to a high standard, given the lack of availability for students to be able to visit campuses, to spend that money, to do what they need to do to be able to visit those campuses. So to say, demonstrated interest is going to vary. So doing this research across the board, right, informs us as to the nature of what's required, what do we understand of their admissions policy, and then how do we better understand our fit. And then the collaboration point is really with me as that college advisor. I'm so grateful that my students come back to me and say, hey, I just visited this school and I heard about this program. Can we talk more about this? Like, are there other ones like this across the country? I'm then able to then do that research with them, walk in lockstep with them, and develop an application narrative that helps them fulfill and get to those next steps. So research is heavy, research is involved, but we're grateful that we're here to help our students to get to that next step with it. So I'll hand it off to Kevin now. And Kevin, sorry I didn't hand it off earlier with the intro. So thank you so much, Kevin, for taking the lead on the rest of the presentation.
Oh, no worries. Thanks, Eric. So I'm here to kind of carry on from that, talk about how to make this college list balanced. There are so many universities out there. I think probably one of the most common questions that I receive is, how on earth do I choose, and how on earth do I make my list narrowed from 20, 30 to maybe 15, 12, 10, whatever it might be. And so how we start to look at that and unpack that would be what we call reach, target, and likely schools. And so to sort of quantify that a little bit for students is we look at the metrics produced by the universities and also the students' grades, particularly in grade 10 and 11, if that's their curriculum, 11 and 12 if they're doing another curriculum, or whatever that might be. Really the third and second to last years, we look at that in advance to help the students better see which schools might be a reach school versus which school might be a target or a likely school. Now, there are schools out there which are reaches no matter what happens. We won't name those for the sake of name shaming, rather, but we will say there are schools which are maybe a little more notorious for being reaches. But that being said, we can always look at those 50% ranges to see where students may fall. And that is not just with GPAs or with let's say grading systems. It could also be with test scores like the SAT, the ACT, and it also could come down to the major as well. There are more competitive majors out there, especially in the last, let's say, 4 to 5 years. We're seeing a rise in maybe more, let's say, computer science, STEM-based majors, and healthcare majors, and some other majors perhaps are seeing less applications than before. Or maybe we're seeing combinations of majors start to rise up. And so there are more competitive majors than others. At some schools, they may specialize in certain majors or in certain fields and not so in others, and that can change some of how that reach, target, and likely school may look for a student. I mentioned before that students may have a longer list and they have some trouble narrowing. And we usually recommend students be targeting about 8 to 12 schools. Now, of course, that can vary for many reasons. Let's say, for example, if a student wants to apply to the University of California, and there's definitely about 8 schools, could even be more depending, then that means there's automatically going to be 8 in there. So maybe that's a little bit of an anomaly. So building that list, it's very important to have a look at all of those universities and see where they may fall within, of course, reason. We don't want students applying to 40 universities out there. That'd be a lot of work. Of course, and this is a question that popped up prior to the session, but we will discuss the decision plans and the benefits to those, as well as the differences and how to strategize. Those would be early decision, early action, regular decision, and rolling decision. There are some others, let's say, slight differences to those, but for the sake of simplicity, those are the major decision plans for the US in particular. The rest of the world doesn't really use that terminology, but we can say that when we are looking at decision plans, those are the major ones and major names to know. If we look outside of the US, just because for the sake of my role, I have to make a plug, we would be looking at primarily the Oxford-Cambridge deadline for the UK, which includes medicine, veterinary sciences, and dentistry. That's 15th of October. And then after that, the applications are pretty much a rolling deadline all the way up until mid-January. That's when it's finalized. Canada, it's a little bit less formal. We'll say early November for the more competitive programs, mid-January as well for the remainder. That's just a few examples. There are no official terminologies for that. There's no early application phrase in the UK or Canada, but that's just kind of how it works in case you are curious about that. If you are curious about those international destinations, again, one more shameless plug. If you'd like to see where our students are going next on our next slide, here you can have a look at a very colorful and friendly map. As it pops up, you can see our students are applying all across the US, all across the world. In particular, I think it's really interesting to see that our students are looking across Europe. In addition to, of course, the UK, which is no longer in Europe, we have students applying to the Republic of Ireland, Spain, Italy, France, Netherlands, some students applying to the UAE and Qatar, where there are international campuses. And then we have students looking at Singapore, Hong Kong, Australia, and New Zealand. Conversation of colleges on that list and started to really look at what these different campuses like as environment. The is very different in certain universities and some a certain, let's say, level. What them can definitely change depending on where they are and what they're looking for. So applying around the world. And I believe we will take a look at some questions next. And we have a few from before today.
Great.
Those is where it takes us.
You did break up a little bit at the ends. Was there anything that you maybe just wanted to repeat since it looks like you are back now, like the very tail end?
Apologies for that. What I would say is it's just like that the student experience is very different across the world. An academic environment, what student life may look like is very different. Just like Eric said, across different universities, the student experience can be very different depending on where the student is applying.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. And this snapshot too is based on some data that we pulled of some of like the top areas or the top schools that students are applying to. So like Kevin said, it's, students are applying all over the place that we are working with here at Logic Prep. But you can see there are certainly some concentrated areas, but we are happy to support students building that college list as kind of diverse geographically and otherwise as they are interested in. So we are moving on to questions. So we have plenty of time for questions. Maybe we start with going back to kind of analyzing those decision plans. So Kevin, you had mentioned that we had a couple questions around that of, do I increase my chances if I apply early decision versus early action versus regular decision? I'll share some of my thoughts, and then Kevin and Eric, please, feel free to jump in. When you are looking at institutions and you're looking at their decision plans, early decision is a powerful tool to use in the application process, but it is a binding decision. So regardless if it's early decision 1 or early decision 2, you are making that full commitment to that college or university that you are going to enroll at that institution should you be admitted through that pathway. So you're demonstrating, Eric talked about demonstrate interest. You are demonstrating a whole bunch of interest in their school because you are saying 100%, I'm going to enroll with you if I'm admitted through early decision 1 or early decision 2. So that's a huge advantage, right? Early decision applicant pools tend to also be smaller. So typically in terms of, you're one of maybe 1,000 applications versus one of 5,000 applications during regular decision. So it's going to be a smaller pool, which usually, admission officers in schools are, not necessarily enrolling their full class or early decision. That ranges school to school. But they are looking at you and kind of, reviewing your application in the context of a smaller pool when it comes to early decision versus regular decision or even early action. These are all questions you want to be asking. So, while we can say that this is kind of generally speaking, these are questions that you want to take to those institutions that you're interested in applying to and saying, do you fill over 50% of your class or early decision? How competitive or is the admit rate significantly different in regular decision or early action versus early decision? So those are some things just to kind of think about. Regular decision pools tend to have larger applicant volume. So you are up against a larger pool of students. But if you aren't ready to make that 100% binding commitment, regular decision might be the right path for you. Early action, typically at most schools, is non-binding. You'll receive your decision earlier. You'll be able to submit your application a little bit earlier. And it is also that non-binding decision plan as well. So just things to be thinking about. But Kevin and Eric, are there other kind of tips around the decision plans that you want to chime in on? Good.
Happy to chime in just briefly here, just to kind of bring us also back to kind of working in our communities. I mean, when a family member or someone in your community who's gone early decision 1, talk to them about what that experience was like, right? Talk to them about, when did they have things done, and when were they on top of things, and when did they have that? And also, 81 and any of these early decision aspects, 82, are commitments. And so it'd be great to hear, from anyone else in your community, what did they see to be able to say yes to that commitment? Because remember, you're saying yes in a very big way by going early decision 1 to any of these institutions. So just want to add that in. Just make sure you're asking folks around you, make those conversations thoughtful and caring, and be able to then build further. What's my reasoning to do ED1, which could even maybe improve your supplement that you end up designing because of the reasons you hear.
I'll jump in on that one as well and say that it really does depend on what the student is really valuing in the application process. Sometimes maybe the student is not ready to commit to one school, but they want to apply early. Maybe they could choose early action and not have the binding commitment, but at least have an earlier application. Or maybe they know they're going to improve some part of their application or hope to do that after the early application deadline passes. So that could be another reason why they may choose, let's say, a non-binding commitment of some way, or a non-binding application round rather. I would say, especially for students who are, let's say, looking for merit scholarships or looking for some sort of scholarships, Particularly, I think for international students, they often find that applying earlier may give them a better opportunity in some cases. I'm speaking very generally, of course, because there's always going to be different cases, but there are situations where applying earlier can help with being awarded a scholarship, particularly for international students.
Awesome. In terms of just another question that we got in advance, and do please submit your questions through the Q&A. We, certainly want to take any live ones that you have on your mind. Is it too late for another SAT test or ACT test? Thinking about when to take those amongst when you're planning to apply. So if you're an early decision student and you're wondering if, it's too late to take an ACT test, you really need to be looking at when are those test scores released and when does my application need to be complete. So pretty much all schools, say or will give the deadlines. They usually give a grace period, maybe a week, 2 weeks after the application deadline to complete your application. So just paying attention to the deadlines of the schools. Certainly, if you're planning to apply regular decision, taking another SAT or ACT in the fall, you'll have those results back in times for for regular decision, but paying attention to those deadlines of the schools. Kevin, Eric, anything else on those pieces? Good. Okay. So thinking about different selectivity of schools, and when we're thinking about the activities list on the Common Application, advice around, and Kevin or Eric, I'll have you jump in here. Advice around, should I be completing all of the activities there? Should I be focusing, on the top 5? How do I go about really impressing the admissions committee when it comes to that activity sheet? And is more activities better than few? Maybe talk to us a little bit about that. Eric or Kevin, doesn't matter which one.
Happy to take it first here, Kevin, and just kind of go from a American college perspective, and that's what I'll primarily be focusing from. I think for one, the process of building out that activity list needs to start off with list everything. It is not a competition of what is important to the college. It has to be an awareness of what's important to the student and what's important for them to tell as part of their what we call an application narrative here at college prep or logic prep. So it's all to say, when we are then putting all of this to paper, we're allowing ourselves this opportunity to reflect, right? To reflect what means a lot. What do I want to tell as part of my narrative? And I think that's part of what the logic prep model here, what we try to do as we coach our students, right? Is to say, how do we further activate amongst all of their interests what we can then display to these admissions officers in a way that highlights the prowess, the ability, but also, right, highlights the meaningfulness of it for the student. So all of that comes from a place of full disclosure. I say this all the time to people: disclose fully, operate from there. And then as we narrow down that list, right, I think using 10 spots is what everyone should be doing. Using 8 or more is what I definitely advise for most folks. At the minimum for the Common App usage. On different UC applications and different state level applications, there may be different sort of qualifiers and different things of they may categorize things differently. But again, make sure you're using each opportunity to tell your story as effectively as possible, which is to say, how much information can you provide in the opportunities you have via that application to then tell the narrative of the student and tell the story of that student. So again, start big, narrow as you sort of approach that application narrative that you're building around who you are and what you want to tell these admissions offices, and then thereby further develop that into a tightly wound application narrative that showcases the student. But Kevin, please chime in on the American side, international side, please. I know I missed stuff, so help me out here too.
Yeah, no problem. I would agree with a lot of what Eric said about having that robust list. I would say in a lot of cases, there are some very particular aspects that that students are drawn toward, whether it might be a passion of theirs, or they value service, or they value, let's say, research of some kind. There could be some things that really shine through, and that often will fit in and be a highlighting point for a student's application. But really having that depth and that continual commitment in activities is really useful. So if that comes across in 8, and then we have, let's say, 1 or 2 others, that's fantastic. I do think that having a variety of activities can be very useful for across the US. When we think of different ranges of selectivity, of course, different schools may have different preferences, or maybe there are certain things that students will be definitely having because of a major, for example. Let's say if an art major, they're probably gonna have art related activities because it fits, right? When we think of going outside of the US, though, things are a little bit different. Activities lists don't always exist in the same way that they do in the US. Sometimes activities are in different places, um, or are highlighted in different places, whether it's the international personal statement, which varies in different countries, or in an interview, which pops up in many places, or it could actually just be simply a very short list of activities, just names, and that's it. So things are very different outside of the US. However, activities are still valued. It just is perhaps valued in another place and in a different setting, and perhaps not even as, let's say, strategically as it would be done in the US.
Great. I think that that is very good insight. And, I always tell students too, it's never too late to get involved. So if you're, feeling like you have 7 really strong activities that you want to put on your application and you are trying to get to that 8th spot, maybe that, 9th spot, you can still get involved. You certainly want to be thinking about activities and areas that you've been involved for multiple years, but you're still a high school student. There are still opportunities for you to join a club that you always wanted to join, or take on student government, or do some volunteer work. So don't feel like you're kind of done when you get to that junior or senior year in terms of involvement, that you can also be highlighting on your application as well to help kind of beef up that area. One of the other questions that we had was around thinking about that college list, and should your top and first choice school on your list always be early decision? And I know that we've talked about the decision plans a bit already, but I think it really just goes back to, are you ready to make that commitment for early decision? Eric and Kevin, please, chime in here as well. But if you know that you have like a top #1 school, like this is absolutely where you will want to go, and they offer early decision, 100% it's something to consider. But you want to look at that full scope of what that decision plan means for you, what that would mean in terms of, merit aid or need-based aid if you're eligible, what it looks like in terms of where you feel like your application is in terms of grades and strength and competitiveness. So I wouldn't say, #1 school equals early decision for every single student, but it's certainly something that you want to be considering if you are 100% solidified that that school is the right fit for you. Eric, Kevin, anything else in terms of kind of thinking about like those top schools on a student's list? Like thinking about, maybe we could even turn this question a little bit around, since I'm not seeing other ones coming through, but what should you focus on when thinking about those top 3 schools on your list when kind of approaching it? Maybe we can open it up that way as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to kind of dive in, Kyla, and thank you for flipping it and adding some more context there, and for all the group here. I think that for one, if we go to the math of it, right, we have to think about that early decision one is statistically a higher likelihood of admission. It is because these are, as an admissions officer, in my perspective, this is a set of students who have decided this is the school they want to attend. They are declaring for me, and so thereby, I think you, as the families and as the students, need to charge yourself with a similar type of seriousness, which is to say, how have you developed your supplement? How have you developed your activities? How have you developed an application narrative that makes you distinctive amongst the larger population of these early Division One applicants? Because if there are so many students who love that institution, that are in this school, that are ready to attend that school, to make distinction, I think while some folks will say, well, it's easier to get an ED1, I mean, the numbers sure are in your favor, but you're also in a pool of students who have the same level of passion, the same level of desire for attendance. So thereby, what in their supplemental question are you making sure you're digesting and addressing appropriately in that application and in the writing? in your activity sheet, are you echoing components of their own community and of what you would like to do in that university? And then they're buying your writing supplements. How are you identifying with that school? How are you identifying in a unique, distinctive way that really, for us here at Logic Prep, we help to really be able to uplift each student's distinct perspective and be able to elevate that to a place where we see, hey, here's something that we've seen be successful in the strategy of applying ED1 to this school or that school. So I think it takes a lot of strategy to be able to say yes to an ED1. Don't worry. I think there are plenty of folks as well who just send in the application materials that they're going to send on January 1. And I think there are times where people get the results back and they see and they think they have to redesign because, well, if that school told me no on ED1, what do I have to redesign to make sure schools tell me in regular decision they tell me yes? And I think that can cause some anxiety, but I'm really grateful that here at Logic Prep we're trying our best to create a full list, right? A full representative list of that students' interests and curiosities, and reflecting that with the colleges that we're hoping to have them apply toward as well. So yeah, I mean, I think it takes a lot to apply 81. It takes a lot to then reflect and to send that all in, and then thereby the aftermath, which is to say the consequences of putting your eggs in that one basket. What do we then have as a plan and strategy to make sure that student has the health of being able to apply to other institutions as well? So just a little bit more on, I think our model of college advising and college admissions advising here at Logic Prep. And so Kevin, please add on if you'd like to here. My ways.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Eric. I mean, I would say in particular, when we look at early decision and those top three schools, there is something to be said for that commitment and for seeing that, but there also is something to be said for looking at the full application process. Particularly when we think about, let's say, schools that maybe don't offer any other options, either early decision or regular decision, and how that may build into the student's, let's say, chances of admission. How would early action schools, would a student be able to apply to early action schools if there's a lot of work for that early decision school, for example? I also think it's quite useful when we look at, let's say, schools that are offering, let's say, early decision 1 and 2. Maybe that's where, let's say, the first choice school may not have that benefit. So then, or may have early decision 2, but the second school doesn't, and that could then create a switch. So there's a strategy behind it. We try to unpack some of that. For again, shameless plug for my global students, because the rest of the world doesn't have early decision and doesn't have that commitment. Students have to be very careful with how they use early applications in the US, because with the rest of the world, it doesn't really apply. So if a student is considering another country for whatever reason that may be, then that early decision would rule those schools out as well. It's not just the US. I get that question, why? Is it only the US for early decision? I said, no, it's the whole world, which is often something that is a little bit confusing. But definitely, I think Eric covered a lot of it, and hopefully I could fill in a few extra blanks for some people.
Great. That's awesome insight. What other questions do you all have? We don't have any questions in the Q&A. I know Kevin answered one around core curriculum, so make sure to take a look at that answer if you aren't familiar with what core curriculum means. Something that you can find at some schools and not others. Eric, Kevin, other pieces to dive into? Sorry, Eric, go ahead.
No worries, Kyla. I actually wanted to reflect on that core curriculum question just quickly here. I think there is an incredible value as to asking students, when the tour guide or there's someone who attended that college, like, what is required when I get there? You'll be surprised that you'll run into a PE requirement to be able to swim in a pool in this country still. And that's to say, is that something your student is not aware of, or that you aren't aware of, or that simply just hasn't flown across your radar? Which is to say, right, how do we allow for each of you all to be able to do this research in a kind and a caring way and a patient way to be able to understand these colleges? And so thereby a question about a core curriculum, I think, opens up an opportunity for you to speak to a student or an alumnus of that college that allows you maybe, hey, what is the lived experience. When am I going to get to taking the classes that are really impactful for me? When am I going to get to that point? And I think that's the question that a lot of my students have on their mind is, I want to go into medicine today. I want to go into the biomedical sciences today. I want to go into business today. So it's to say, are we finding and identifying curriculums that are allowing for that? Or are we saying to a student who's going to attend, some flagship state college, well, you actually have to take 3 English, 3 science, and 2 math before you even get to electives. These are very different, right? School types are different definitions of that. And as you discover and conduct this research, how can we then leverage the fact that you're learning from different perspectives and learning from different experiences to then get the full picture of that college? So co-curriculums are just a one way, right, to get a very, very broader sense of that college experience overall. And so it does look like, Kyla, we have 2 questions kind of pop in here. So happy to let you take the lead with these 2.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. Maybe Kevin, you can actually dive in from like the IB standpoint. Can I put you on the spot? But the 2 questions are, very similar, just thinking about IB students also doing AP classes and how IB and AP testing impacts or influence applications.
Sure. Yeah. I'll start with the latter question because it will build into the former, I think, quite well. It really does depend if an IB student is considering AP courses, what courses those might be in the AP. If their school maybe doesn't offer a certain subject that is in the IB diploma, which they may need for their major. Let's say, for example, if a school is not offering computer science for that IB diploma cohort because there's not enough students, maybe an AP computer science course would fit if the student wants to go ahead and pursue that. Generally speaking, I don't think a student needs to go and take AP economics if they're already doing IB economics, especially at higher level. The IB diploma courses as the full diploma is quite challenging. Adding that single year AP course on in grade 11 or year 12, the first year of the IB is a challenge. And I would say usually no, unless there is something missing perhaps in the context of the school or in the student's profile. But it really does depend. Another thing that's very important to note, and some students will say, do I have to do AP math if I'm doing IB math? Generally, I say that would be particularly for the university's perspective, especially from the international side of things, where IB math is very clear which IB math they accept and which ones they don't. The US is a little more flexible in that sense, but I do get that question asked quite a bit. So just be careful with the IB math and which math course and which level of math the university may accept. Now, how that all builds into the application, I would say is IB results on the exams can be useful for credit if the student, let's say, is applying for transfer credit when they go to the university. However, the IB predicted grades is what the university will evaluate on, which is different from the AP. And that's because the IB is a 2-year course of study. So when the student applies, they're applying essentially halfway through, maybe a little more than that. So these are predicted grades primarily where they're being evaluated upon. Whereas AP, they may have 3 years of AP exam results and AP credit that they apply with, which is a very different approach. And I'm not saying that one is better than the other because in some cases, 3 years of AP, the grades may be mixed, or maybe there aren't every subject, a variety of things, right? But I would say that the impact of the application is quite different, and how the application is reviewed is quite different, but also the level of rigor is very different as well, and many other factors will come into play. But I think I've talked enough for that, so I'll let Eric or you kind of, if you want to jump in on that as well, from your experiences. Add some context.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. When I was reading for international schools at Northeastern, a student, exactly like Kevin said, that was completing the IB diploma program, so doing, the full diploma, that carried a lot of weight. And so there really wasn't this expectation that students were additionally taking AP classes or even AP tests on top of that. For a student, who was taking IB courses and not necessarily looking to complete or enrolled in the entire diploma program, those were similar kind of weight in terms of taking AP classes. So certainly looking at standard level versus higher level, but being able to, or looking at it in similar rigor, let's say, if you're taking a higher level IB course, maybe you paired with some APs or no APs, we're looking at that in similar weight as an AP class here in kind of the domestic curriculum space. So that's just, my 2 cents there. Eric, I don't know if you have anything else to add on top of it. Good. Okay. Any other questions with a little bit of time left, or Kevin, Eric, anything on your mind, or, tips or words of wisdom that you feel like you haven't shared yet that might be beneficial? Kind of thinking about college lists or college strategy in general. I'm trying to think as well.
Go on tours, make it sort of fun. Don't don't overthink it. Ask the questions that come to mind at the same time. Don't ask the questions that are itching at the back of your mind. Ask the questions that are at the forefront, right? Which is to say, why are these students showing you around? Sending an email to an admissions officer and representative should include, hey, here's my perspective and here's what I know. Could you help me understand better? And I think there are so many different venues nowadays with technology that even in my time in 10 years of working in this has gone from, hey, I can, walk in the door at a building and get to know someone, to, hey, they're down the block from me, or they're at a college fair, or, yeah, I'm going to reach out to someone who speaks actually my language at their office, right? I think there are so many different ways and levers we can now use that, I really do find it that the more personal we can make this, the more, I think caring and responsible it can feel. So please feel free, use all the channels available to you to learn more and to really build that profile up. Um, oh, we did have a question just come in quickly here. It's about, can you speak to choosing a safety school? Yeah, I mean, I think safety schools do not, I think one of the misconceptions is that a safety school is a school that you don't want to attend, but you're going to get it. I think that's a huge misconception, because there are so many colleges and universities, not only in the United States, but around the world, that are going to enable you to find a fit that is of the type of the, you're looking for a school very, very invested in pre-professional programming that is focusing on developing students who want to go to med school, to veterinary school, to optometry schools. There are schools that are not ranked very highly that do that at an incredible clip. I mean, there are schools here, I'm based in Boston, all around me, that may not be the brand name that you know from Boston, but have done an incredible job to help students find financial stability, career growth, and to take them on the journey into their dreams. So a safety school should more represent not necessarily my chances of getting in, but a representation of both my chances of getting in and why do I want to attend that school? What makes that school just as joyful as the school that's on the top of my list? And so think of it that way. I mean, choosing a safety school should mean something to the student and should excite them as well, as much as, and I hope as much as, their top choice that they're looking at as well. But that's hard to come by. It's hard to wrap our minds around that in a very stressful and very, very pressure built process as well. I'll hand that question off to anyone, Kevin or Kyla, if you want to expand on safety schools.
I think just one little tangent on something that you said is in related, but a little bit of a tangent. Your college list, you should feel good about attending every single school that is on that list, right? And so to Eric's point, your safety school shouldn't be like, oh, I really don't want to go there, but I think I have a good chance of getting in. That's not the attitude that we want you to have. So those 8 to 12 schools, or wherever you're falling, you should feel good about attending every single one, no matter kind of where it falls, if it's your number one or if it's your bottom of the list. You still want to feel confident and want to feel good about every single school that you are submitting an application to, because you're putting your best foot forward. You are, saying I'm a serious candidate. I'm putting my application in to be considered to be admitted to your college or university. So a little bit of a tangent, but connecting back, as we want you to feel good about every school that you're putting on that list, no matter where it falls in terms of likely reach, safety, whatever that looks like. And Kevin, maybe you can answer the next question.
Yes, definitely. The next question is for me. Our extracurricular activity is important. In the most clear sense,
Kevin, it seems
especially
like
as
you're breaking
applying
up
to
again.
university
Hear me.
for a. Oh, am I back now? Hold on, back. I think I'm back.
I think so. I think you're back. All right. Maybe start over if you don't mind. You cut out right at the beginning.
I didn't
Thank
say much, so it was just me kind of getting to my sentence. But essentially, yes, they do absolutely still matter. They just look a little bit different in terms of output. So for example, in the US, we see 10 activities on the Common App. We won't see that necessarily outside of the US. However, these activities will need to be very particularly looked at, related to the student's major, especially for courses across continental Europe, Australia, New Zealand, in the Middle East, and of course the UK and Ireland. They look for students to have really tangible experiences in their fields of study. And they ask them about that very openly in interviews, in personal statements. They expect a student to have a knowledge base of these courses they're interested in and have already explored them. They can't just decide, I want to apply to business and have zero background in business, or can't talk about business. So absolutely, it's just not necessarily as extroverted these activities are as they would be in the US, but definitely extremely important.
So another question that came in, do you choose a certain acceptance rate for a safety school or use other criteria? Kevin, do you want to jump in on that?
Sure. So, since I'm off mute, I might as well. What I would say is it's tricky to say that for every student because acceptance rates may look a little bit different. Generally speaking, acceptance rates can be a helpful tool. I would say it also will depend on the school context as well, particularly if a student is maybe doing the IB curriculum or the AP curriculum, and they've had a very strong, let's say, series of students go on to that university. It may build into that sort of let's say safety school pathway in some way. But I think acceptance rate is quite useful for safety schools, depending on the student and depending on what curriculum they're doing. But I think everyone else can also add this as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Also thinking about that middle 50% profile that we touched upon, where does your GPA fall? Where does your testing fall if you are submitting with testing and they, have a test optional policy? So thinking about selectivity in terms of admit rate being one piece, but also what is your kind of academic profile looking like? What is your rigor looking like? What are your grades, from ninth grade all the way through maybe your first quarter if you're applying later on, or first semester into your senior year. So it's not just admit rate, certainly a piece to the puzzle. You can also look at, how large is their applicant pool, how large is their campus. So just other factors to be considering there as well. Eric, any other criteria or pieces? Okay. Any last minute questions with the few minutes that we have left? Hopefully folks are feeling pretty good. Okay, what just came in? Holistic approach versus academic. How do you determine that? How do you determine which college is more heavy on academics versus holistic approach to review student applications? A lot of times in most schools, on their website are going to say we review, students in a holistic way, but it's also, that is a great question to ask an admissions counselor or admission representative is, when you're approaching the review or when you approach, reviewing my application, are there pieces that are carrying more weight? Is GPA super important in your review process, or, is it really balanced out with extracurricular activities? So it is doing a little bit of that research online. Most schools are not going to sit there and say the only thing we care about is academics, because they truthfully are looking at the whole piece. Kevin may be wrong, but I said most schools may not be saying, that is the only thing that we're looking at, and we aren't looking or paying attention to your extracurricular. But asking that kind of pointed question of, do things carry more weight, and how is it reviewed, and how is it considered? That's going to help you make an informed decision about these schools. But Kevin, Eric, anything else? You can disagree
Since
with me too.
I made a little bit of a face, so I have to defend myself. Yes, I would agree. Unfortunately, outside the US, things are a little bit different. They don't work that way at all. It tends to be fairly academically driven in whether it's academics just by looking at only grades, or academics by, let's say, grades and academic related activities. But what I would say in the US context, because this can be a useful bit of information, and Eric really shined a great light on this before about looking at the university websites. But if, let's say, a university has a very flexible policy in terms of elective courses, or in terms of choosing courses throughout a student's journey while they're studying at the university, that tends to mean they look a little more holistically than if a student is really taking very set courses throughout their time there and they don't have as much choice. That tends to lend a small light into the admissions process. I don't say that without putting a disclaimer that that's not always the case, for sure. But in my experience at a very large public university, where majors tend to be more fixed for numerous reasons, we were looking more at academics than we were at, let's say, activities. But then at a small liberal arts college that I worked at, they were looking at the whole picture and really analyzing everything. And when the student was there, they were really open for choice for the first 2.5 years. That's just my experiences and insights for you all.
Similar. No, I agree with everything that's been echoed, and I think, really, I think, ask the admissions office. I mean, there is no reason for them to reply to you with anything but their actual process of how they digest and understand admissions policy, and how they process the information that's submitted to them. It's not in there. It's not to their benefit to hide that information. That's to say, there are things you just won't know about, which are institutional priorities, which are year-to-year fluctuations amongst admittance, the development of a new college, and the importance of developing students for that college. And these are the things why, for us at Logic Prep, we focus on how do we understand that larger picture from our, not only our knowledge, but from our experience as both admissions officers and professionals. So no, thank you for the question. And again, ask it straight on. You'll get lots of different answers for sure.
Perfect. So we are just at time. Thank you all for attending today. Certainly follow up with us, with Logic Prep should you have additional questions. If you aren't working, directly with us at this point and you are interested, please reach out and fill out a form so that we can get connected with you and share more about what we do here at Logic Prep. But with that, we hope that you enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you again so much for hopping on for the last hour with us.